If you're trying to build a brand from scratch, one of the best places that you can start, or the first place that you should start, is you have to understand your market and your audience. Plainly put, you need to know exactly who you're selling to and why they buy from you. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Heavy on Brand podcast. And to kick things off, I have our resident expert, brand designer, all things crushing it, website branding and all the good stuff. Andrew Wiseman has joined the show, and we're going to get into a number of things today around branding. This is my go-to guy, y'all. Y'all just need to know this. Dude has saved us time and time again with his genius. But my brother, welcome, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's really cool to be on. And by the way, that's my official title, the 2 or 3 sentence of lots of commas that you just mentioned. That's what I put everywhere. So you nailed it. I'm surprised you memorized it. I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here. Excited to get into it.
Yeah, man. Cool. So I want to jump right in, man. The first episode that we're going to talk through today is really, how does a brand, or I guess plainly put, how do you build a brand from scratch? And so with all the information that's available out there on social media, YouTube, you can consume a number of different perspectives and opinions around what it means to build a brand. But we all have to start from somewhere, right? And Andrew, I know you get this a lot. You know, what are some of the best places to start? What should you focus on? What should you not focus on? Should I get right into design? Should I get right into colors? There are a number of things. Hopefully this video will help you just kind of digest and unpack and simplify kind of how we even take our clients through the process of redesigning a brand or helping them build a brand from scratch. So hopefully you get a lot out of this. But to kick things off, man, you know, if you're trying to build a brand from scratch, one of the best places that you can start, or the first place that you should start, is you have to understand your market and your audience. Plainly put, you need to know exactly who you're selling to and why they buy from you.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the people that are going to tell you who you are. A lot of times we look at branding and we look at our companies, our startups, and we want to say, all right, let's define ourselves this way and teach everyone to look at us in that light or define us that way. But ultimately, a month, 2 months, 6 months down the road into interacting with your audience, they're going to start telling you who you are. And they're the important voice because they're your customers, they're your clients, your partners, right? So understanding those individuals, those groups of people, whatever it is crucial to defining your brand from a strategic perspective, because at the end of the day, they're going to end up being the ones that truly define your brand, your company, your startup, whatever. And that's going to build really equity with your culture and your community for your brand.
Yeah, I love that, man. I think one of the things that people can really do to, and you'll hear me use this word a ton, simplify, like how you can simplify this process. And we do this a lot. And we did this, I think, early on, not only with CT, but specifically when we started rolling out brand sprints for clients.
Yeah.
We asked them, plainly put, what would make this process better? So we had clients that we work with who were building websites, redesigning brands, establishing new brands. And the constant set of feedback that we got was, hey, this is really, really great. But if we could do this a lot quicker, then that would be extremely helpful. And so that leads me to kind of that first point of actually interviewing your customers, or understanding your audience, is to actually interview your customers, right? Really ask them and have conversations with them, because they've already given you money. They've already bought into what you do. They trust you.
Yeah.
Assuming that you've done a great job, they will, in many cases, give you very, very candid feedback that you can really implement into your business. And so that's always usually the best place to start. You don't have to interview every single last one of them, but you can start with 3 or 4 or 5, something that's simple, something that's easy, to really get their feedback after they've already experienced what it means to work with you and collaborate with you.
Right. Yeah, and it's cool because we see the best brands never stop doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you see, I think of a lot of different brands right now. What comes to mind is Liquid Death how they have kind of taken over a place in the market, and they've never stopped innovating, and they've never stopped interacting with their customers, right? And so their customers are constantly redefining and defining that, segment of the market and culture. And so Liquid Death can kind of continue to move in the direction that their client customer base does, right? So it's important, yeah, at the offset, and like you said, we've done it countless times with clients and even for ourselves, is to get to know your market and help them kind of like bring them into that journey of like, what is this? Who are we? How can we better serve you? And that in turn is going to lead to more customers, more culture building for your community. And so it's the same throughout the process. Is you just, and I think that's one of the things, like pulling back the curtain and taking a step like way back, is branding is an ever growing, ever evolving thing. You never stop working through that process. You don't get to a point where, okay, we've completed our branding, we know who we are. Like, it's kind of like almost like personal growth thing where you never want to stop learning, you never want to stop growing. It's really the same for your brand.
I love that you said that, man, because we've seen it time and time again. In certain instances or in projects that we've done in the past, sometimes we'll reach an impasse with a client, and it happens. It's just part of the process. And sometimes it get really, really hung up on reaching like the final stage of the brand within the process. We always have to reinforce, hey, your brand is a living, breathing thing. It is not an end game. It is not a destination. It is just an evolution of who you are, who you serve, how you serve them, your mission, your purpose. And that changes. As long as you're going to be around as a company, as an organization, your brand is going to evolve. It's going to change, and it's okay. And so hopefully that alleviates some of the pressure that we've seen, that, companies take and kind of assume, because they're like, oh, it has to be like perfect, air quotes, right? But give yourself space and grace and latitude to know and understand that this is an ongoing process, and you're just building on top of it, and it's just, stacking the bricks, as we always call it. And so I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, we sometimes we put these things in boxes, like creating a buyer persona, and all of these things are just terminology that we use. But people change and evolve, brands change and evolve. So that constant dialogue of like, what is it that you want at the end of the day? What are your pain points? What are the things that need to be solved in your life, at work every day, with your customers, with your clients? Like, that stuff is always evolving. So being involved in the process and just continuing that dialogue and conversation is so important. Because, like, again, we use this terminology because it's just easy to define certain things in branding and marketing. But all of those things change and evolve. So it's important to build those relationships and actually like dive deep and have those dialogue sessions with clients or whoever, like, consistently.
Yeah, it's important. And I love how you just slipped that in there, because the second component of this is, as you just spoke to, is like really understanding your customers, right? And so what you're speaking to is, we all know these terms, right? But it's like, who's your customer avatar? What are your buyer personas? Like, it's important to understand that, knowing that it's also nuanced, that people have different things that they're going through, and they have different things that resonate with them when it comes to why they decide to follow a brand, connect to a brand, buy from a brand. But the more you can understand your customers, to your point, desires, the challenges that they have, how they operate, kind of the challenges that they're faced on a day-to-day basis, and how your brand shows up in those moments is going to be key. Because at the end of the day, you can design and create the sickest looking brand, right? That has the best logo, the best colors, the best imagery. But if you're not communicating your brand in a way that demonstrates you care about your customers' issues, then no one cares. They really don't.
Yeah. And that's what we want. We want people to care.
Yeah, you got to care.
Care about what we're doing. And when we work with whoever, ultimately, we care so much that we also we're partners, like truly partners, where we link arms and we want them to care and their customers to care about what's going on. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, 1,000%, man. So one of the other key components that you want to that is helpful to understand and do is, now here's the time you have to turn inward a little bit, right? You got to really, really understand who you are, right? So you know the customers that you want to serve. You've talked to them. You understand kind of what their challenges, what their issues are. But probably even before that, we should have put this first, quite honestly, is you have to understand who you are. Like, what's your mission? What's your vision? What do you stand for? What purpose are you trying to be known for, right? Because at the end of the day, like, those are things that people connect with, right? If you are a brand, if you stand for something more than just a product or service, then that demonstrates to the people that you build community with that you are human, right? Like, you are more than just trying to make money. And we all understand and get that everyone has to make a living, for companies to exist and be sustainable. You have to make revenue, you have to earn. But at the end of the day, you also have to demonstrate that you're very human too, and that you are just like the next person.
Right. Yeah. And this is another one of those things that, like, it can easily be defined and put into a box as a mission statement or
Yeah.
a purpose statement, And sometimes I think we treat branding like this checklist of, like, I need a mission statement, I need my core values, I need a logo, those kind of things. But these things are constantly evolving. Like, yes, we need to define them and we need to know who we are, but leaving that as it is a foundational piece to everything else that's done. So I like your point. Like, this could honestly go first, but this idea that, like, unless you have an understanding of that, you can't progress, you can't move forward, and you can't really, like, even know who your audience should be if you don't know what your purpose and mission is. But I think adding on to that, that's something that, with culture shifts and with just time in general, you need to leave that to where, like, that may change and evolve over time as your customers' needs change and evolve. Now, the ultimate foundational purpose doesn't change, but how you go about accomplishing it definitely will, more than likely, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. But, like, yes, understanding who you are, what you want to be known for, it's core. It's absolutely core.
Yeah. So on to the next piece. So what we just gave you is just kind of the first part, kind of your foundational things of, if you're trying to build a brand from scratch, or you're in the process of a refresh, or whatever it may be, like we said, you have to understand your market, you have to understand your audience, you have to understand why you exist and why you serve, who you serve, and all the different things. So as we move on to, like, the next part of this, part two, so to speak, is you have to clarify your position in the market. And what do we mean by that? Like, you have to, like, what's the one thing you want to be known for? And I think that can be a very difficult thing to kind of unpack and figure out, especially if you are new, but even if you have been around for a while. You tend to, like, we're all guilty of it. When you're building a business, you tend to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and next thing you know, you're doing a little bit of 12 things. And so it can be very difficult to isolate, all right, this is the one thing that our community, our market knows us for, and this is, like, the line that we draw in the sand, and this is what we stand on. And so that's really the first piece of clarifying that position, or your positioning within the market, is what do you want to be known for?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the old adage of being a what is the adage, Brian? Like, being a expert at multiple things, but
Yeah.
butcher.
Yeah.
Know what the actual phrase is, but that's the whole thing.
We
Like,
all know what you mean.
yeah,
Yeah.
try to do too many things, and I think sometimes that comes from a perspective of fear or lack, where, like, I just need to be available in all of these different areas because my business isn't going to grow unless I expand what I'm doing. But I think in 99% of cases, you actually need to shrink to scale, right? Where you be an expert at this thing and you become an authority and people come to you. And whatever that is, I like the idea of that. And we've seen it countless times with folks that we've worked with where, and on the flip side, the branding side of it, where I come from, is like it's a lot easier to define and build narrative for a brand when there is a single most important thing. Like
Yeah.
this is at the core, this is what we do, this is our heart, our mission, and we're experts at this. Rather than let's define all these different things and try to wrap them up with a bow, it's a lot easier to say we are X expert, right?
Yeah, no, 1,000%. I think a simple framework, so to speak, that you can use to try to identify, like if you're struggling with it, you want to be able to identify exactly who you help and the transformation that you deliver for them. And you do that by also communicating how you differ from everyone else and why
Yeah.
you stand apart from the market. Like there's a much cleaner way of identifying that, but essentially is you want to understand and define exactly who you serve, the transformation that you can deliver, the benefits that you can deliver, and then why. Right. And I think that's if we can all just kind of keep that at the forefront of everything we do from a branding perspective, I think that gets us a very long way. Because here's the thing, right? If you are running a business, you're starting a business, you've scaled, gone back a little bit, whatever it is, you almost have to fight against yourself from like introducing new things.
Yeah.
Because part of what makes you great as an entrepreneur, as a person who's running a successful business, is the fact that you have ideas and you can you can bring a vision to life. But sometimes as you start to grow, you have to kind of reel that in a little bit, because what will end up happening is you'll start to introduce all these new services, all these new products, and all these offers or whatever it may be. And you just got to really keep it simple. So clarifying that positioning and what you want to be known for and keeping it simple down to one, two things tops is a huge step forward.
Yeah. It's the reason that you see like startup founders and just entrepreneurs, innovators build a company in a couple years and then sell it, and then build another company and sell it. Like they essentially, like with their genius and with their mind and even with their passion, they could lead and direct each of those, but they understand that okay, there's somebody better for this to be the CEO of this company, right? Where my mission, my vision is to start and build. And it might be a lot of different industries. It might be product, it might be SaaS, it might be AI. But their mission and their vision is as a founder, but not as a CEO runner of company, right? And I think it's cool kind of perspective to see that even someone that has, multiple skills in multiple industries, that understanding of I can't spread myself this thin. I need to be this one thing. And so even the perspective of an individual entrepreneur to a company that is really, really, really good at one thing and is known for it. And that's how they grow.
Yeah. And that brings us to kind of the second piece of, being really good at how you position yourself in the market. Don't be everything to everyone. Like and I think that's exactly what you're speaking to, is like you have to be extremely clear, define, and even in many ways own the category that you're in, and be clear about the problem that you're solving for, and then wrap and build your identity as a company, as a brand around solving for those problems. And then that's when people start to flock to you.
Yeah.
So the third piece of that you always want to keep in mind, and again, you're going to hear us talk a lot about the human element of branding, right? And at the end of the day, how does your brand make people feel, right? Are they drawn to it because there's some sort of emotional connection that you were able to tap into? Because again, you are acutely attuned to what their issues are, what their challenges are, right? So don't be afraid. We've seen a lot of this as well. Is sometimes people, when you build a brand, they feel the need to be very rigid, corporate, for lack of better words, stale. Like you need to inject as much personality as it makes sense into your brand, as long as it's authentic to who you are and your culture. But you have to tap into like understanding how you're able to make people feel and being able to tap into that and the customers and the community that you build is in many ways just kind of a secret sauce that I think sometimes people really just overlook.
Yeah. Yeah. We say it all the time as we work with customers is that like humans are who we build products for. Humans
Mm-hmm.
are who we communicate with ultimately. Like AI, there are dozens of great AI tools. There are dozens of great products out there that, don't look or feel human,
Mm-hmm.
but those things are designed by and for human beings. And so building relationships and starting there and just treating people like people and not assets
Mm-hmm.
is such an important thing. And
Yeah.
so I know that we come by that philosophy and we operate that way because ultimately if we can't from a human perspective understand who we're working with and their goals and their fears and their passion, then the product, whatever the product is, if it's brand strategy, brand identity design, one little tweak to a logo, no
Mm-hmm.
matter like how big or how small it may seem, it's all coming from human perspective and it's human beings that are interacting with it that matter, right? So I love that point. Being
Yeah.
human and acting like a kind human is such a big thing.
Man, it's huge, man. It's huge. I think we just forget it sometimes. We just overlook it, but it's a real thing and it works. It really works. So part three of, we're gonna get into some more stuff, but the third part of what we always recommend and what we've seen when it comes to just building a brand from scratch, going through a rebranding effort. It's a huge deal. And so we don't want to overlook the fact that it takes a lot to do that and to come to that decision as to all right, now is the time for me to do this, because in many ways it's a very personal journey, that we've seen a lot of founders and entrepreneurs go through, because in certain cases it's a reflection of them in a major way. And so people get connected to the output or the outcomes of these things, but you have to start from somewhere. And so one of the things that I really appreciate about you, and this kind of again brings me to the third point of this, is you are really, really big on defining and developing that verbal identity first before you even get in the lab to design a thing.
Right.
That process, and I would love to hear you, unpack this a little bit more, but I've seen you do it time and time again. And it's part of like how we even onboard people when they decide to do projects with us. It's help us understand how your brand sounds. Like, what's the tone? What verbiage do you all use? Like, how do people communicate? How do you communicate? How does your team communicate the brand? Is it playful? Is it serious? Is it a bit of both? Is it edgy? It's like all these different things that kind of come to play. And I love being a part of that process with you, because we'll get on a call, get in a meeting with a client, and one of the first things you'll show them is just a list of all the words that they kind of shared with us, whether
Mhm.
whether it's through the form that they've completed, or we've had initial conversations with them. You're kind of regurgitating back to them like, all right, you said playful, you said serious, you said whimsical, you said all these different things. Help me understand, or help us understand, why you feel like it's so important to start at the verbal place first, the verbal identity first, before doing anything else.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about that is when we intake information, when we have these initial calls, just to get to know a client, they're saying all these things just as a like this is how I describe our brand to people. This is how I describe our customer base. Whatever we take those words, we define them, but then what we also do, and you know this because you've been part of this process, is we kind of redefine those words,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes we flip them and invert them and say, okay, if this is what we're saying, this is what we're not saying, and so each of those words then creates kind of its own individual word cloud of like, what are some other synonyms of this word, what are some things that like we think may feel a little bit deeper. It's kind of like a feelings chart where you have very basic feelings on the outside
Mm-hmm.
and you want to get to the core of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we take those words, we really unpack and define them in different ways that have a little bit more purpose behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And then those are the things we share back to the client. And sometimes what that does is it just unlocks something in their mind, because they've been describing their brand in this specific way for so long with these specific words. And there's nothing wrong with those words,
Mm-hmm.
but we give them new words to define. And so the reason that it's so important that we do that is, one, we want to get to know obviously how they feel personally.
Mm-hmm.
We work with a lot of founders. So like you're saying, it's very personal to them. Like this is their mission and their passion in life. And essentially they're trusting us with that thing.
Yeah.
And we could take it in a complete wrong direction as experts, So, and we do not do that. We take the time to make sure we define things. But anyways, when we define those words and create kind of like what I call visual words, you've heard that 1,000 times from me.
Yeah.
What those words do is they give us cues for colors, typography, and that's putting it, very simply. But basically, the psychology and the kind of the purpose behind some of those words, we take and build narratives for their brand. Now, a brand may have a very specific story, and they want their logo, they want their brand to kind of show that story in a very clear way. But oftentimes they want their brand identity, as far as just the things that the colors and the typography and the way they express their brand and their logo, they want it to define their single most important thing, right? Their thing that they do well. And so what we do is we want to give that even more purpose behind, the symbol and the logos and things like that. So we build out narrative, we build out a story that can be told with some of the words that they've shared with us, the mission that they have, their vision, and that may be evolving. So we want to make sure that what we create will stand the test of time. And so that's why we dig in and really give it a lot of purpose. And it's not just this thing that we throw on a screen and say, this is a unique logo, but it doesn't really have mission and purpose behind it.
Yeah.
It's not going to accomplish what we want it to. We want it to be rooted in the same things that the verbal identity are rooted in, those words and those core attributes that they've shared with us.
Yeah, people can lock in on like just kind of 3 or 4 core elements when you're trying to, pull together how to communicate your brand in the usage of words, right? If you can nail it down to like the promise, so what do you commit to delivering for your clients and the people that you serve? Again, you mentioned the brand story, like that's hugely important because that connects your audience to like whatever personal mission you have around it. So I think that is a huge lever that can be pulled. If you come up with your set of like key phrases and things of that nature, right? Where it's like, all right, you as a founder, these are the things that we tend to lean on, right? A lot of our key phrases exist in like our merch and on our website, right? Yeah. But in many ways, it signals our culture. It signals exactly what we stand for. And so if you can come up with a set of those, that would be extremely powerful as well. And then in many cases that kind of dovetails into coming up with like 1 or 2 taglines. Like, what do you want to be known for? What do you want people to remember you by? And how can you do that in a way that inspires people to take some level of action or say, like this is the group for me. This is the brand for me. This is the product for me, right? Like, how do you create something that resonates and has staying power in the minds of the people that are buying from you?
Yeah. It's cool that like all of this stacks. So when you define purpose and mission, it's literally foundation. And then when you go and define your verbal identity, which affects your messaging, your taglines, your website copy, all of that stuff that's vitally important, that needs to point back to your purpose and mission. And then these other steps we're about to walk through, all of them come back to the same starting point, the foundation, which is why it's so crucial to build strategically and to have that purpose and that foundation, because all of these pieces are going to coexist together and they're all pointing back to that same exact place. And that's your story right there.
Yeah. So getting into the fourth part of this, and this is the stuff where people really get excited about, where, they try to come in, like this is where most people want to start, but this is usually like 3-4 steps down in the process. So this is after you've done all the foundational things. You've identified the audience and the market that you serve. You know exactly how you're positioned in the market, and you know how to communicate your brand's message and mission. Now it's like the visual representation of that. And so one of the things I love, and I'm going to continue to praise you and give you your flowers on this, but one of the things that I love is when you talk about the visual aspect of the brand, you talk about it in terms of systems. And I can't tell you how many times we've been in meetings with clients and you'll say something to the effect of, hey, we're going to build out a full identity system and design a system that is built to scale but work together, and we stack on it, right? And so walk us through your definition of what a visual identity system entails, what it serves, and how people can start to wrap their minds around how it serves them and the people that they serve.
Yeah, that's great. So I will start with saying your brand is not your logo. And that's a really simple thing to say. And
Say it one more time,
your
please.
brand is not your logo. And it's easy to say, and we see it all over the place. It's, every day you log into LinkedIn, somebody has posted that, right? But it's a lot more difficult to adhere to, because a lot of times, and this is where we come into the process. Startup founders, agency founders, anybody loves their logo. They want it on a shirt. They want it on their hat, their golf shirt, whatever. Because it's an identifier. It's something that they'd get tattooed, right? It feels good to have a logo that is yours and it represents your brand, the thing you're passionate about. But that symbol is not your brand. When we define branding, again, like I was saying, it goes back to that purpose and that vision. And so every piece of your brand, where it touches your customers, any touch point, whether it's your email signature, it's your website, which is the big one, right? That's the thing that people think of first. Or it is your golf shirt, or it is your pitch deck that you go and raise money with, down to the pens in your office, right? Yeah, we put logos on that kind of stuff, but the brand and the system of the brand has to do with a whole lot more than that. So it's easy to define with bullet points. So obviously you have your logo. That's an important one. You have your color palette. And I say color palette simply. Usually we develop a couple color palettes, maybe 3 or 4, just depending on the different touch points, right? We may have a specific color palette for UI, UX design, whether it's for your app or for your website. We may have a color palette that's specific for your printed materials, one that's specific for your social media, right? They all coexist together and they're built within the same system, but it can get really intricate, right? And that's where we're here to help and guide. And then you've got typography alongside logo, colors, typography. And this as well could be a pretty broad system in and of itself, but it's going to touch all of those different mediums. And then you've got what we call brand expression. You may have heard it as art direction before, but basically, how do these individual pieces coexist together alongside graphic elements, whether it's patterns, whether it's textures? It could be the way that you take your photographs internally, or your product photographs, or maybe it's the treatment on photographs that you place on social media. All of these different things, along with several other more boring ones, they all work together to create this holistic system so that your email signature feels the same and can be identified the same as your website. Or the shirts that you wear to a team retreat have the same consistency and tell the same story that your logo does by itself, or that your website does, or that, again, your email signature, your golf shirt, whatever it is. All of those things coexisting. And the point of it being a system is that we build a foundational system for your brand, and your team internally, or a designer you hire, or a team 10 years from now can take those core elements and continue to grow and expand upon them to build out even more brand assets for you, right? So the system is what kind of creates this blueprint for developing your brand and continuing to use it. So the brand, again, going back to the very start, the brand feels alive and it can constantly evolve within that same system and feeling that like it has that same identity that was developed, right?
Yeah. So thank you for breaking that down. I think, we've seen plenty of times. There's several moments in the process of like doing a rebrand or a building a brand for a client, and we'll kind of see a client have these aha moments, right? And it's usually rooted in seeing like the building blocks, come together in the visual component of it, right? Because part of what you will share and show, during our meetings and, initial expressions or concepts or whatever it may be. And let's just say we'll start with like the color palette, right? You'll build a color palette based on the emotion those colors kind of deliver, and
Correct.
you'll list them out, right? And I think
Yeah.
you'll see sometimes it comes like, I see why, like that makes sense, or it feels right. They don't know why it feels right.
Yeah.
But it's like when they see it and then they pair it with, okay, typically if someone has this shade of this color, whatever it may be, then here are some of the expressions or some of the feelings that will be provided or will come across throughout, your interaction with that brand. The other thing to bring up too is a lot of people really do get hung up in the logo, right? And it's the badge of honor, like you mentioned, right? But there's also an opportunity, especially if you're building from the ground up, to have, your primary mark, but then you'll have your secondary and even maybe even a third option, just depending on who you are and what you're trying to accomplish through it. But it allows for so much flexibility, but it's still rooted in the foundational work that was done ahead of time or before this point to understand how all these pieces work together. And again, work together in a system. That's
Yeah.
why you call it a visual identity system.
Yeah. And I think the simplest way to say it is that the identity system means paying attention to the details. Because like you're saying, every decision that we make, if it's a specific shade of a color, if it's the combination of two colors, if it's what your headline font is versus your body copy font, if it's like I said before, one little tweak to the logo, one extra pixel here, there, those things matter to us because each one of them is defined already with the foundation that we've laid. So your mission and your vision, your verbal identity, the way that your audience has defined you and talks about you, all of those things then inform how we build out your identity system. And so the details matter because they all tell that same story. So oftentimes with our customers, we say like, this is the most fun part, but it's also kind of the easiest part. Because if we've done the pre-work correctly, if we have really pulled out everything that we can as far as brand strategy, as far as mission and purpose, if we've defined the brand verbally, then all of those decisions are kind of already made and predefine how we build out the identity. Now, oftentimes there are several different ways that we can look at a logo.
Yeah.
Because we'll pitch, 3 or 4 completely different logos, but they all tell the story just in a slightly different perspective.
Yeah.
So again, all of them have that same foundation, the same story and narrative behind them, but they're just slightly different skews of that story, and maybe tell one part of it with a little bit more emphasis than another. So that's something that's really cool about the process is it's predefined by the work we've already done, but we can kind of be creative on top of that and really like see where we can take it.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure. And so, most people, when they go through this process, you have a sense of what the end game is going to be, right? And it kind of leads us to like the fifth and final point around this is, okay, you've done all this foundational work. Now, how does it all come together, right? You've done the messaging work, you've done the research and customer work as far as understanding, what you're solving for, what their issues are, and all the different things. But how does it come together? And it usually flows from a standpoint of, all right, we've built the brand, we know exactly who we serve, what we're saying, we know what our marks are, we know what colors we're moving forward with, but now it comes together in usually the form of a website or a landing page, social media even. And so now you have kind of the brand engine, for lack of better words, that can fuel all the various touch points that people will have and will come across when they, are trying to interact with your brand or they're introduced to it for the first time. It's okay, we have a website that clearly communicates exactly who we are, what we do, and who we serve. But then it's also very clear on how people can take the next step with us, and it feels right, it feels consistent, it doesn't feel off. How many times have we seen where a client will have a website and their social media just doesn't even match, right? It's like, is this even the same company? Like, you don't want that kind of you, you don't want that kind of confusion when people are trying to evaluate whether or not to do business with you or move to the next step. So all that stuff is important, like your assets as to what you just mentioned: website, landing page, email templates, social media profiles, headers, all the different things. That is usually like the output that we get to whenever we're helping a company rebrand, trying to get to something that they feel proud about and excited to go to market with.
Yeah. What you just described is we've seen it so many times. I kind of look at it as almost it's the branding paint by numbers approach where, and we've heard this verbatim probably dozens of times. I just need a logo and some colors.
Oh my gosh.
And that's a misconception of, well, those are the two things that people see, right? So if they know that this is my blue color and then I use my logo everywhere else, they're going to understand it's me. But that's not true at all, because what you're saying, they're going to plug those paint by numbers things into a Squarespace template or something. And nothing wrong with Squarespace. We can definitely do a lot with a tool like that. But it's, okay, I have my predefined template over here and I'm dropping in my color and logos. And then for social media, we have somebody that, can build out some graphic templates. And so as long as we get our color in there and we use our logo consistently, we have a solid identity. But there's so many specific things within those platforms that need to be defined, that need to be built and customized and created with, again, purpose and mission, and the things that need to be like predefined with the work that's done within strategy. Because at the end of the day, without the foundation, it will crumble. And that's cheesy, but there's a reason it's called foundation, right? And that's what we want to develop, is something that will last, something that has purpose and has longevity to it. And it's not just a quick solution that is cheap and easy and gets you on your way, but then 2 years down the road, you have market confusion, you have disloyalty because people don't understand who you are, they don't know how to identify you. So that's why it's so important.
Yeah, man. So just to recap really quickly to bring us home, if you're building a brand from scratch or you're considering, going down this path, you need a brand, you need to do a rebrand, whatever your situation is, keep these 5 things in mind. You want to make sure you understand your audience. You want to make sure you understand them well, and make sure that you're positioning your business, your brand around the issues and how you can solve for the issues that your customers are having. You want to make sure you're known in your market, in your industry for the thing. So be clear about who you help, how you help them, and why you're different from everyone else. The third thing is you want to make sure that your messaging is where it needs to be. You want to make sure it has the right tone. You want to make sure you're using the right language that personifies your brand, that fits the culture of your brand. You also want to make sure that you're using the same language and verbiage that your customers are using. You don't want to blindside them with things that are not common for your industry, common for their space. The fourth thing is making sure that your visual identity is rooted in the strategy that we mentioned leading up to it, right? So your colors, your logo, your logo marks, your various expressions of the brand. You want to make sure that it's consistent with all touch points that you have with your brand holistically. And then lastly, when you think about your brand in its entire existence, is your website consistent? Are your email templates consistent? Are your social media templates consistent? Do they all represent the brand the right way? And so if you start with those things, it may sound like a lot, but if you keep it simple and you start with those 5 things, then you're really on the right path to building a brand that is scalable, that you can grow with, that can evolve, and then honestly, in many ways, be something that is a true identifier and performance driver of your business. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us for this episode. Hopefully, you all get a lot out of it.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Heavy on Brand podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. If you need more information on all things marketing and branding, check us out at thecarbonthread.com. Until next time, stay heavy.